Let's first look at the big picture before we talk about Qatar in particular. How would you, you know, assess Prime Minister Modi's three-day visit to these two important Gulf nations? The fact that, of course, talking about the UAE, the Prime Minister visited that country for the 7th time in 8 years. Qatar is also a country that we've built a much stronger relationship with over time. And the fact that, now there is plenty of evidence to suggest that India has stronger ties with the Arab world than ever before. How do you look at it?
Thank you, Neha. I think you have already answered half of the questions you said, which is related to the Arab-India relationship, which is bonded in history for centuries, which have been really fostering over the years. But yes, having said that, I would say the prime ministers of India, Narendra Modi, have facilitated in bringing back the bridges between the nations of India and the Arab world, particularly in the GCC country, because he was the first prime minister to visit the country after 38 years in 2015. So a repeated visit by himself, and then the award he was given by most of each nation is really reflect the bond and the cordial relation that India have developed with the Arab world. Not to speak of the Indian diaspora, which is already play a major role in the area. We have more than 8 million Indian are residing in the Gulf state. We have more than 14 million Indian visit the states and more than $70 billion revenue. And these Indian expats have been contributing to the welfare of the people inside their country. And there is integration of the Indian community within the community of the Gulf country. Remember that the Indian community is the largest expat in the Gulf country. In fact, it has exceeded many of the countries, even their population. In Qatar, they are more than double the population. In Emirates, they are 3.5 million also. So to speak of all, this is how it shows how much trusted the Indian community there. And so I think the Prime Minister visit to UAE has given a modern model to the rest of the world and to the rest of the countries, that the fostering relations in the economy and the political and the cultural and also in the security can be a model to play and to implement in another country. So he has finished a very successful and historic visit to UAE, and then followed by Qatar, which is also, Neha, is after the release of the 8 Indian prisoners, and that is also by his personal intervention and with the backdoor diplomacy, which have played a major role in releasing the 8 Indian. So this is show us also that the Indian foreign policy in South Bloc have shown us a realism and pragmatism, along with the personal touch that the Prime Minister was able to succeed and bring India back to the map of the Arab-India relationship as a whole.
Absolutely, sir, and I'm glad you brought up the issue of those 8, Navy veterans who were recently released from a jail in Qatar. I was going to come to that next, because this visit comes in the backdrop of that very significant development. Ambassador Sheikh Sharma, let me ask you, sir. Dr. Awad says that the Prime Minister has concluded a historic and a very successful and fruitful trip of the UAE and Qatar in the last 3 days. Now, there was so much shock in India when news first came in of those 8 former Indian Navy personnel being sentenced to death by a court in Qatar on espionage charges. Of course, the Modi government intervened, and first their sentences were commuted. And then suddenly earlier this week, there was great news when we learned that 7 of those 8 men had already returned home to India, and all of them had been released from jail. Now, that does say a lot about how the fact that Prime Minister Modi has personally invested in these relationships between India and the Arab world has paid off. The investment that he's made, the personal capital that he's put into this. How significant do you think that development has been, because it's been described as a huge diplomatic victory for India? And then even what we saw in the UAE, Abu Dhabi getting its first Hindu temple, the Prime Minister of India inaugurating it, the Prime Minister of India and the President of UAE constantly referring to each other as brother. Clearly, India-Arab ties have come a very long way under the Modi government.
Yes, indeed. What you say is, Neha, very correct. The Arab world believes in real brotherhood, in the sense that, they like to relate always very closely. They are not like the Westerners who have a certain formality and they're very cordial, but heart-to-heart connection is missing. Here, if you establish a heart-to-heart connection and if you reach out, they respond wholeheartedly. Now, that has been the case with PM, like in the case of UAE. He's been to 7 times to UAE in the past 10 years and 3 times in the past 1 year. And with Qatar, India's Prime Minister has visited twice, where there was a desert. For years and decades, there was no Prime Minister of India visiting Qatar. So our Prime Minister visiting there, and the Gulf countries, they read about India, they are alert, and Qatar particularly is a very geopolitically very smart, very savvy. They have been doing lots of things in the Middle East. They have been doing diplomacy, mediating. They have been part of the team which has been working to get peace between Israel and Hamas. And so they are savvy. And when India comes there, they appreciate it very deeply. So, and then when this Navy veterans were, as you mentioned, sentenced to death, it was a shock to India. And those of us who have dealt with the Gulf countries, we knew that only at the top level can you work and it can be resolved. Because there the government and regime is such that they have, the emir decides many things. So it was just as well that that intervention from India was at the highest level, and they appreciated it, and that's how not only the sentence were commuted, but finally they were released and they came to India. It has gone a long way. It has gone a long way to forge the relationship between the two countries. And the other thing about, in UAE, Prime Minister was received by the president, and who was the crown prince when he first visited in 2015. So, there is a bond which is growing every time you meet. And the whole culture there is that when you are friendly, then you come freely, come often. And they say in Arabic, kulli yawm tal. That means every day come, and their doors are open. So we also, PM has been playing that, that informality and that closeness. And it has worked. It has worked because the Gulf countries, and traditionally, historically, they have been close to India. The Gulf gap is not very far, and hundreds of years we have sailors going to Gulf, and they're coming to the Malabar coast. So they know India very well, and in the Arabic language also, the name for India is Al-Hind, and it is not many countries which have a definite article before their name. So India is very special for them.